Welcome to Health and Harmony Beyond the Teeth, where we dive into all subjects that will help you become healthier and happier. As a dentist, I believe dentistry is more than just teeth, so I created this show to focus on overall health. We will hear from leading experts about eating better, exercising better, breathing better, and sleeping better. We want to help you create harmony in your life so you can live your life to the fullest. We want you to thrive. Hello, welcome to Health and Harmony Beyond the Teeth. I am your host, Dr. Hal Stewart. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Leonard Sax. Dr. Sax is an MD. He's also a PhD graduate of MIT. He graduated from MIT in 1980 at the age of 19. Yes, you heard it right, age 19. He then went on to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned both a PhD in psychology and an MD. He did a 3-year residency in family medicine in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. In March of 1990, Dr. Sax launched a primary care medical practice in Montgomery County, Maryland, from 1990 to 2008, where he provided primary care to children and adults. In 2001, he began visiting schools and speaking to parents. And in 2005, he published his first book, Why Gender Matters, followed in 2007 by his second book, Boys Adrift. And he followed that with Girls on the Edge, and then in 2015, The Collapse of Parenting. And we'll talk about those books in the interview. By the way, The Collapse of Parenting became a New York Times bestseller. Dr. Sax has spoken on issues of adolescence and development in the United States and all around the world. Since 2001, he's visited and worked with more than 460 schools, university, juvenile justice facilities, communications of faith, pre-Ks and nursery school, corporations, community groups, and parent groups. And it's an honor to have him on today. Dr. Sax, welcome. Thank you for being on our podcast. I want to focus, at least here in the beginning, on what I consider an epidemic of children being diagnosed with ADHD. Through my work as an airway specialist and dealing with kids that have sleep disordered breathing or sleep-related disordered breathing, my eyes have been open to how sleep deprivation and airway deprivation can cause these quote-unquote ADHD symptoms in children, which really ADHD is just a myriad of symptoms that are lumped in together. You touch on this in your books, but you also cover some other areas, especially when it comes to boys and the education system. Could you elaborate a little bit on your findings and on your research about this epidemic?
Yeah, you're right, spot on with regard to ADHD. So in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, I have a chapter comparing rates of diagnosis for ADHD in this country with kids in other countries. So in the United Kingdom, for example, comparing the United States, United Kingdom, the kid in the United States is 14 times more likely to be on medication for ADHD compared to a kid in the United Kingdom. Not 14%, 14 times more likely. That's 1,400% more likely. And incidentally, the United Kingdom is an outlier among European countries. Kids in the United Kingdom are more likely to be on medication compared to kids in France, for example. I wrote a book for a French publisher titled Pourquoi les garçons perdent les filles se mettent en danger. And working with colleagues in France, I learned that in all of France, there are fewer than 6,000 kids on medication for ADHD in the whole country, 67 million people in France. There are more kids in Philadelphia, my territory. There are more kids in Philadelphia alone on medication for ADHD than there are in all of France.
Wow.
And why is this? So that's a question I try to answer in my book, The Collapse of Parenting. Incidentally, the original title of that book was The Collapse of American Parenting, and the subtitle was Why Most Kids Would Now Be Better Off Raised Outside North America. But if you're not a celebrity, you don't get to choose your title. But as you have just pointed out, sleep deprivation can perfectly mimic ADHD. And as a physician, I have consulted. So for example, parents took their son who's in middle school to the board certified child psychiatrist, Connor scales off the chart. Doctor said, well, he clearly has ADHD and put him on Adderall. But he started having side effects. Parents saw something I'd written for the New York Times about the risks of some of these medications. So they brought him to see me. And I said to the parent, I said to mom, does he get plenty of sleep? And mom said, oh, absolutely. You know, we make sure he's in his bedroom 9 o'clock every night, the latest, wake him up the next morning at 6, 9 to 6, that's 9 hours. That should be enough. So then I said to the boy, do you have a video game console? Of course. Were you playing last night? Yeah. What were you playing? Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty. When did you finish? Oh, like 1:30, 1:45. So he's getting to bed at 1 in the morning or later. He's trying to wake up at 6. He's getting 5 hours of sleep. Sleep deprivation, as you just noted, perfectly mimics the diagnostic criteria, meets the diagnostic criteria for ADHD of the inattentive variety. He's going to be off the chart on the Connor scale. He's practically falling asleep in every class. But the appropriate remedy for sleep deprivation is sleep, not Schedule II amphetamines. Yeah. And again, there should not be a video game console in the bedroom. That's not just my opinion. Those are the guidelines of the American Academy of Pediatrics. But I say to the parent, you got to get the video game console out of the bedroom. And the parent's like, oh, he'd totally freak out.
Well, who's the parent?
Can't be intimidated by your kids.
Yeah.
Boys should not have a video game console in the bedroom. Girls should not be going to bed with their mobile phones. At 2 in the morning, your daughter is getting a text. OMG, Jason and Emily just broke up. This is really big news. We have to talk about it. Parents are amazed to find that half the 9th grade class is awake and texting at 2 in the morning. This has to be the parent's call. At 9 o'clock at night, you take the devices from your kid, you shut them down, you turn them off, put them in the charger, which from now on is going to be the parent's bedroom, and have it back tomorrow morning. Now, I warn parents that when you make this announcement, your daughter may not approve. She may protest. She may say, well, I use it as my alarm clock. Let her know they still make actual alarm clocks. You can go to the store and buy one. They're not expensive. And now she gets really upset. She says, well, what if there's an emergency? Remind her that you still have a phone and your phone will be on in the bedroom. If there's an emergency, her friend can call you on your phone and you'll decide if this emergency warrants waking her up at 2 in the morning. It's not age appropriate to put this burden in the lap of your 14-year-old daughter. What is your daughter supposed to say tomorrow in school? When her friend says, hey, I texted you last night at midnight. How come you didn't answer? Is your daughter supposed to say, well, researchers at Stanford have found that sleep deprivation in adolescence is a major risk factor in the etiology of both anxiety and depression amongst adolescents? Come on, that's ridiculous. You can't expect a kid to talk that way. You got to allow her to say, hey, my evil parents take my phone every night at 9. Won't have it back till the next morning. This is your job. You have to be willing to be the evil parent, to do what's right for your kid.
We prescribe sleep studies all the time. For young children, we don't, but for teenagers. And just last week, we got sleep studies back for 2 young boys. They're in their, 13, 14, Adriana. And of course, the parents help them, get them started on it. And then the parents leave the room. Well, if they take the sleep study off, if they disengage it, then it won't work. So they leave it on. And both of these boys did not go to sleep until 2 o'clock in the morning. And you can imagine what they were doing. They were playing video games or watching TV. So you hit the nail on the head right there. The kids go to bed at 9. Well, when do they go to sleep?
Well, what's remarkable about the story you just shared is these kids knew they were being monitored.
Yeah.
And you would think that they would have the common sense to realize, okay, tonight, go to bed early. Otherwise, the grown-ups are going to realize I'm staying up till 2 in the morning. But what's really struck me is the kids are perfectly open about this. This boy said in the presence of his mom, yeah, I was up till 1:30 last night playing Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, because they perceive this as the norm. Right. Because all the kids at school, many of the other boys who stay up till 2 in the morning playing Call of Duty are hanging out with other boys who stay up till 2 in the morning playing Call of Duty. It's an online collaborative thing. And that's one reason it's so appealing to these boys and one reason they value it above their achievement in school. When you say to these kids, hey, you're sleep deprived, you're not doing well in school, it's like, so that's not what's important. And what's important is being the first to complete all the missions in Call of Duty. And the parents will be like, no, that's not what's important. You got to do well in school so you can get a good job, so you can have a good life. And then the boy will say, ninja. And the mom will say, what do you mean, ninja? What are you talking about? He says, I'm talking about Ninja, also known as Tyler Blevins. He earns $500,000 a month playing video games. I'm going to be the next ninja. I don't need to worry about the War of 1812 or Spanish grammar.
Right.
So I wrote an essay for the New York Times giving parents the tools. What do you say when your son says, and the title of the essay is, but mom, video games are my job. When your son says, but not mom, video games are my job. I don't need college. I'm going to be Tyler Blevins. I'm going to be the next ninja. I'm going to earn $100,000 a month playing video games. So what do I need to worry about school? How do you, the parent, answer that? Again, if you just Google my name, New York Times, and video games are my job, you'll find the article I wrote giving parents some guidance in that regard.
Oh, that's a great resource. You know, you've traveled all over the world, and you've seen all these different cultures. Who's getting it right? What, you wrote your book,
The South Island of New Zealand.
So who's getting it right in the world?
Yeah, the South Island of New Zealand, and the original manuscript of The Collapse of Parenting, I talked a lot about the South Island of New Zealand. New Zealand as a country consists of two islands, North and South. North is Auckland. And Auckland is a big city, and the culture is very much like any other big city. I mean, you literally, except for the accent, you wouldn't know whether you're in Auckland or Los Angeles. It's people are speaking English, and it's a very diverse culture. But once you get into the countryside, whether it's Hastings, Hawke's Bay on the North Island or Christchurch and almost anywhere on the South Island, it's a really different culture. It's a much healthier culture where parents and kids hang out together on the weekends, where there are strong bonds across generations. I would also say Scotland, outside of Edinburgh and Glasgow, is getting it right. I would say that most of German-speaking Switzerland, outside of Zurich, certainly Appenzell, where I spent a week, is getting it right. Strong, but what I mean by getting it right is strong bonds between parents and kids. And there's a very simple way. If you're thinking of moving and you want to know, is this a good place to move? Meet with some kids and ask them, what's your favorite thing to do in your free time? You're looking for a place where the kids say, hang with my family.
Yeah.
Hanging out with my family is my favorite thing to do in my free time. And American parents are like, oh, that's ridiculous. That would never happen. Well, it's happening. It's happening right now. In fact, it's happening in the United States, in Salt Lake City, and in a number of communities across Utah. Utah, I think, definitely gets surprised for the most family-friendly among the 50 American states. When you walk around Salt Lake City, it's really surprising because it's a city that's designed for families.
Yeah.
They make accommodation. They've thought about, okay, what do you do with a dirty diaper? Where can a mom breastfeed her baby? You don't find that in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, or Austin, Texas, for that matter, but you do find it in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Salt Lake, in that area in the last 10 years, and I agree with you 100%. You'd see a lot of families just walking around together. Throughout your travels, I'm assuming these countries that have it right parenting, probably the children are overall healthier there as well, right?
They are much less likely to be anxious or depressed. And again, I present those data that kids in those countries, the ones I mentioned, Scotland, Switzerland, New Zealand, are much less likely to have psychiatric diagnoses compared to kids in the United States. Germany across the board does better than we do as far as the rates of psychiatric diagnosis. And I cite one very telling study where German doctors compared the rates of bipolar disorder in the United States, pediatric bipolar disorder, children being diagnosed bipolar in the United States versus Germany. And they found that American kids are about 40 times more likely to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder compared with kids in Germany. And the German doctors said, okay, why is this? Are German doctors really doing a terrible job and underdiagnosing? Or are American doctors doing a bad job and overdiagnosing? And they made a very compelling case that American doctors are overdiagnosing bipolar disorder. behavior that outside of North America would be considered mood swings and impulsive tantrums in this country gets diagnosed as bipolar. And before you know it, this 7-year-old is on Risperdal, Zyprexa, Seroquel. An American kid is now 93 times more likely to be on antipsychotics like Risperdal, Zyprexa, and Seroquel compared to a kid in Italy. Again, you'll find those data in my book, Collapse of Parenting, Chapter 3. And American parents, for the most part, are not aware of this. They're not aware that our country is now an outlier, that we now medicate children to an extent that is unknown outside North America. And I keep saying North America because Canada's following close behind us. Canada is becoming more like the United States, which is not a good thing in this regard. But outside of the United States and Canada, nobody does this. Outside of the United States and Canada, if a 7-year-old is having mood swings and temper tantrums, you talk to the parent about mood swings and temper tantrums. In this country, the teacher says, well, you know, he's really having mood swings. Have you thought of having him evaluated? And you take him to the child psychiatrist and boom, he's on Risperdal, Zyprexa, or Seroquel at 7 years of age. And I see this
all the time. Sad. Well, you've addressed the current education system that can lead to the misdiagnosis of ADHDs in boys primarily, but girls as well. Could you expound on that a little bit?
Okay, so in 1980, fewer than 1% of American kids were diagnosed with ADHD, and it was overwhelmingly boys. Boys outnumbered girls by 9 to 1 in 1980. Today, about 1 in 5 American boys has been diagnosed with ADHD, about 1 in 10 American girls. So it's now only 2 to 1 because there's been a rapid rise in the diagnosis of ADHD among American girls. But we are outliers, again, compared to the rest of the world. And again, in the Collapse of Parenting, I explore the several factors that have led us to being outliers. One is the collapse of parenting, the fact that parents, many of them, are not doing their job. One of your first jobs as a parent is to make sure that your kid's getting a good night's sleep, which means no devices in the bedroom, no video game console in the bedroom, no smartphone in the bedroom. And that's your job as the parent, as I said a moment ago. And a lot of American parents just are not up to that. And they will say, as I said a moment ago, they'll say, oh, I couldn't take her phone. She'll totally freak out. And the girl is 10 years old and they're intimidated by their 10-year-old. You have to have the courage. Look, we've got good data on this, which I share in the Collapse of Parenting. British kids are just as likely as American kids to possess a smartphone. There's no difference in the rates of possession or in the age at which they acquire a phone. But kids in England, Scotland are not going to bed with their smartphone. The parents take the phone from them. In this country, kids are going to bed with their smartphone, and that's a big problem.
I couldn't agree more. We see that all the time. I think we do more counseling with parents than we do the children, and we tell them exactly what you're saying. Is there a common denominator that you see other than lack of sleep? Obviously, that we've been talking about that.
Oh, there are many other. That's one story, but there are many other pathways by which kids get incorrectly diagnosed as ADHD. Another pathway is kids who hate school. A kid who hates school is not going to pay attention in school, even if he's well rested. If he hates school, he's not going to be paying attention. He's thinking about how he's going to get to the next level in his video game and rehearsing that in his head and thinking about what to do differently. And the teacher calls on him and he's got no idea what the class has been talking about. So he's not paying attention. Incidentally, I have great respect for teachers. This is not the teacher's fault.
Right.
The teacher's checking off. He's not paying attention. Look, I have on many occasions gone into the classroom at the invitation of the parents to observe. And the teacher's observation is always correct. If the teacher says this boy is not paying attention, you can be confident he's not paying attention. The job for the clinician then is to figure out why. Why is he not paying attention? Is he not paying attention because he's sleep deprived? Is he not paying attention because he hates school? And I got a very simple way to figure that out. And this comes from a presentation I do for psychologists, pediatricians, social workers, called Evaluation of the Child Who's Not Paying Attention. So here's what you say to this kid. What's your favorite subject at school? emphasizing the word subject. What's your favorite subject at school? So I'll give you two quick examples. Years ago, parents brought a boy who's in eighth grade. He'd been diagnosed with ADHD by the child psychiatrist. He was on medication, but it wasn't very helpful, and he was getting side effects. So they brought him to me for a second opinion. And I said to him, "What's your favorite subject at school?" He said, "Well, I love math, I love art." He said, "But I really hate English language arts, creative writing, hate it." Okay, that's tremendously helpful information. He's just told me he doesn't like anything involving the written word. And in one session, less than 40 minutes, I determined he has dyslexia. He was misdiagnosed. He doesn't have ADHD. Okay, well, now we got the correct diagnosis. We stopped the medication. We bring in appropriate resources, and he's done extremely well. He's graduated from Georgetown. This is years ago. He did great. But then another family brought in their middle school boy, also diagnosed by a adolescent psychiatrist as having ADHD, also on medication. And I said to that boy, "What's your favorite subject at school?" And he said, "Lunch." Okay, if the answer is lunch or recess, you got to take a step back. He knows lunch is not a subject. If he tells you his favorite subject is lunch, he's telling you he hates school. Now, hating school is a big problem because it will totally undermine motivation, but it is not a psychiatric diagnosis. And very often, as I explore at length in my book, Boys Adrift, very often the problem is not with the boy, but with the school that has made being a boy a pathology and academic achievement uncool for boys. So in that case, the solution for that boy, you have to switch schools, find a school that's more boy-friendly. And this boy, again, did very well, but they had to switch schools.
I love your story in your book, Why Gender Matters, about Jeffrey in Zimbabwe. Could you a brief synopsis of that story?
Okay. Yes. True story. So this family, this boy had been diagnosed with ADHD and was on medication for ADHD. But his father arranged for him, and this was many years ago. This would have been back in the 1990s that this story actually took place, before the collapse of the Zimbabwean economy in 2000. But anyhow, but this was back in the 1990s. So the father arranged for him to spend a summer with a professional hunter in Zimbabwe, which seemed like a really crazy idea. And mom was like, "Well, he's got to take his medication with him." And dad said, "No, he's not going to take his medication with him." And he really took it seriously. And he discovered he had great patience. He could sit for hours, silent, waiting for the game. And he actually really connected with the local tribesmen, the Ndebele tribe there in Zimbabwe. And they taught him how to use the spear. So it's this big, heavy, lethal spear that's designed for killing animals. And he practiced with it. And then he, using the spear and in view of the tribal elders, he threw the spear and killed a bird. And he shared with me a photograph taken of him holding up that dead bird. And I believe he's holding the spear in his other hand with a piece of the bird on the spear tip. Yeah. And that transformed him. That was a life-changing event because he acquired a skill and used that skill to kill a living thing. He felt that he had become a man, and it transformed him. And this was decades ago, and it was more than 20 years ago. And he's gone on, he's had a good life, and he's off medication. I don't think he had ADHD.
Yeah.
I think he hated school. And this event helped him become more mature.
What would you say to parents? They can't send their kids to Zimbabwe to be an assistant to a hunting guide, but
no.
There's what? How would you?
You got to find a different school. So I encourage parents, if you have a boy who's bright but just not doing well, not doing nearly as well as he ought to be doing, I hope the parent will read my book, Boys Adrift. Most libraries have a copy. It's also available. All my books are available as audiobooks. And see, does your boy fit that picture that I'm describing in my book? My book, Boys Adrift, is specifically about a boy who has average or above average ability, but is doing poorly in school. Why is he doing poorly? Because he hates school. Why does he hate school? Well, I go into that in the book. And then if the school's not willing to make accommodation, if they don't understand what your son needs, then you have to switch schools. And I'm not telling you to do anything my wife and I didn't do. We were not happy with the schools available to us in Montgomery County, Maryland. And so I sold my practice and we moved. It was a big deal. We moved to Chester County, Pennsylvania, and it was the right thing to do. If your kid has to be your first priority, your kid has to be a higher priority than your job.
Yeah.
And if there is no good match school available to you where you live, then you have to be willing to consider moving. It's a big country, and there's lots of boy-friendly schools out there. If there's none where you live, and if that's the problem, then you need to move. So again, in Boys Adrift, I have a chapter on the overdiagnosis of ADHD among boys. And there's a lot of reasons why ADHD is overdiagnosed. Sometimes it's because the boy is sleep deprived. Sometimes it's because the boy hates school. Sometimes it's a boy who's gifted. There's been a dumbing down of public schools in the United States that began with No Child Left Behind Act 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, No Child Left Behind and accountability really changed American public education, because all of a sudden it was all about test scores. It was all about improving kids' test scores. And that had been happening throughout the 1990s, but No Child Left Behind really accelerated that. And teachers and school administrators, beginning with No Child Left Behind, were judged based on how the kids were doing on the tests. Well, if you have a kid who's scoring at the 90th percentile and you take him to the 95th percentile, that doesn't buy you very much. You have the kid who's scoring at the 10th percentile and you bring him up to the 50th percentile, that's huge. And so No Child Left Behind created a tremendous incentive to focus on low achieving kids and bring them up to grade level. And don't worry about the gifted kids because they're already scoring proficient. And I have visited fourth grade classrooms where the teachers are focusing on the kids who are reading at a first grade reading level, trying to get them to the fourth grade reading level. And this gifted kid who could easily read at the seventh grade reading level, he's looking out the window. He's bored to tears. And the teacher says to him, Jason, can you please summarize what we've just been talking about here? He's got no idea. He's been daydreaming for the last 30 minutes. He's not paying attention, but he doesn't have attention deficit disorder. He's gifted in a classroom that is now targeted for underachieving kids. So as I go at substantial length in my book, Boys Adrift, there are many reasons why American kids, especially boys, are now overdiagnosed with ADHD. And the remedy for those kids who are misdiagnosed is not medication. The remedy is to understand what's wrong here. Is it that the kid's sleep deprived? Well, then he needs to get sleep. Is it that he hates school? And then maybe we need to find a different school. The remedy has to fit the boy.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting in your book, Why Gender Matters, where you talk about how boys are more physical, but they actually create bonding when they get in fights, whereas girls are more verbal, and the more nasty things they say to each other, they tend not to become friends with those people.
Yeah.
With the roughly 10 or 12 minutes we have left, I'd like you to kind of talk about that a little bit, and then let's get into, half of our audience has girls, so let's give that a little bit. I know you wrote a book, Girls on the Edge. I have not read that one, but could you expound on that a little bit?
Sure. So there has been an explosion in anxiety and depression among girls that I was seeing as a family doctor back in the 2000s, 2005, 6, 7, 8. And so that prompted me to write the first edition of Girls on the Edge, published in 2010, in which I said, hey, social media is really going to be toxic for girls. And it's definitely going to be a problem. And that prophecy has really come true. Yeah. And so the publisher asked me to write a revised edition, which if you're a parent of a girl, make sure you get the revised edition published in 2020. It has a picture, a photograph of a girl on the cover, and it says revised edition. It's much more up to date. The factors that I identified in 2010 are all still valid, but I mean, TikTok did not exist in 2010. A lot of things have changed since 2010. Actually, Instagram did not exist in 2009 when I was writing the book. So it's a completely different landscape now. But the factors are the same. Social media turns out to be immensely toxic for girls, much more so than for boys. And again, in Girls on the Edge, I explore why that's so, and the need for parents to limit, govern, and guide what their kids are doing on social media. And TikTok especially is a game changer. It's immensely toxic for girls. And parents really need to severely limit that. And I give the evidence for that and explain what parents need to do in Girls on the Edge.
Mm-hmm. It really is amazing. Social media I'm thankful that I didn't grow up with it, because I can just imagine being a teenager and having to deal with that. Dr. Sax, author of Why Gender Matters, Boys Adrift, Girls on the Edge, the revised edition, and The Collapse of Parenting. I'd buy all 4 of those books and read them thoroughly, especially if you have Girls on the Edge revised edition. Dr. Sax, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. I would have to say this is probably one of the more powerful podcasts that we've had, because what you're talking about is very, very serious. It's going to affect our entire country in the next, it already has. So any parting words that you might have with our audience?
Well, I encourage parents to prioritize the family. Fight for a family meal at home together every evening. If a activity conflicts with a meal at home, cancel the activity. It's more important for your kid to be at home with you at supper than for them to be amazing out doing their computer coding class. And again, I defend that claim in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, the importance of prioritizing the family. And parents can go to my website, leonardsax.com. That's SAX.com, leonardsax.com. And send me an email if you like, and I'll do my best to respond.
Okay, that's awesome. We'll put that down below so that people can see it. And you never get that time back. I would urge people to think that way. You don't get that time back. They're only young once, and you never get it back. So, and it's not really a sacrifice. At first, it might sound like a sacrifice, but it really will be a very positive thing for the entire family. Dr. Sax, thank you so much. We'll look forward to having you on again in the future. And I wish you nothing but the best, and keep up the wonderful, wonderful work that you're doing.
Very good. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you. This has been Health and Harmony Beyond the Teeth. I'm your host, Dr. Hal Stewart, and I will leave this with you tonight. As I just said with Dr. Sax, they're only young once. And it doesn't really matter how old they are. If they're still in your house and you still have that parental control, if you will, over them, do the right thing, sacrifice a little bit. It'll be well worth your time. If your kids are grown, it's never too late to spend that time with them. So I wish you all the best. And I'm signing off now. Dr. Hal Stewart saying, live long, live happy, and smile at somebody today. It might be the only person that acknowledges them, gives them a smile. Thanks a lot.